60 seconds to comply.
I think you'd better do what he says, Mr. Kenny.
You have 60 seconds to comply. This is minute 86. Part man.
Pod machine.
Oh,
Pod. This minute begins with Leon firing after Robocop and ends with a car chase between Lewis and Boddicker.
And we have a guest. My friend...
It's been a
I
while.
know. It has been a while. I actually bought someone who is definitely smarter than both of us and has the accreditation to prove it. He is the host of the Cinema Catch-Up Club podcast. I probably couldn't list all your achievements without dragging this on for another hour, so I'll just introduce you as Dr. Stephden Platt. The one question I need to ask you, is it Stephen with a V or Stephen with a PH?
It's actually Stephen with a PhD. Thank you very much.
I had to set that one up. Thank you for joining my podcast for a change.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's quite nice being in the guest seat. I've had to do basically 1 minute of research, which was nice as compared to what you normally have to do. And it's lovely to be here.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the Cinema Catch-Up Club's really interesting. That you get a person who has seen the film, a person who hasn't seen the film. You do a little preamble, watch the film, and then chat about it. And it's a ton of fun. I've been on both sides of that seat, and I always had a good time with it. Except maybe Sweeney Todd.
Well,
It's a great concept.
I mean, yeah, the fun thing as well is you get to see films that you wouldn't otherwise be made to see. I find I'm really bad at watching films just for, the sake of enjoying them, which I think is how you're meant to watch films. So,
Wow, that's actually very relatable.
Yeah.
No, you're supposed to watch them 1 minute at a time like us.
Oh, okay. Well, yes.
It takes you a few years, but...
Yeah, admittedly. I mean, I should say, full disclosure, we have done Robocop. It was actually one of the first films we did, I think episode 14, which was about 6 years ago. We did Robocop.
What number are you up to now?
That's taxing me. Just pulling up a little spreadsheet.
I know it's over. I know it's over 100. It's going to be getting close to.
It's over 300.
300.
We are at. I believe we are at the time of recording. We have recorded 312 episodes because we just recently recorded an episode for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. So for our podcast historians, that's where we are in the timeline.
Yeah, well, this is going to be coming out sometime in the future because we've been on a bit of a hiatus, and so we're starting to slowly record the backlog. I guess it's tradition for minute by minute guesting. Tell us a bit about your history with Robocop, then. I mean, beyond just the podcast.
Well, I think like all people who were born in the late 80s and early 90s, Robocop was something that was relatively accessible on VHS, and it was one of those films, a bit like the Predator films, that stand out for being really good early examples of seeing extreme violence in media. And Robocop, I think for me, always kind of stood out because somehow I ended up with a Robocop action figure before I knew who Robocop was. So it was Robocop, but it was without the visor. So it was the stretched face over the metallic skull version of the character, and it was a cool action figure. But I had no concept for who he was for a couple of years, and so I just mixed him in with all of my Star Wars action figures that I had. And I was a big fan of Red Dwarf, so he kind of filled in as Crichton when I played when I was playing Red Dwarf with action figures as like a 7 or 8 year old. So my first instance with Robocop, my first interactions, was actually having no idea who he was, and it was only when I was a little bit older, I think I was probably about 11 or 12 when I first saw Robocop, that I went, oh, that's who that action figure was. Oh, okay. And yeah, like a lot of people, I think I watched it and went, that was really fun. Let's watch the sequels. And I think I was young enough at a time that the sequels were okay. So yeah, it was interesting.
I will defend Robocop 2. Robocop 3, no, I saw that in the cinemas, and no, it was bad.
Yes, I've not gone back to watch either 2 or 3 actually since being basically an early teenager. So I am looking forward to when we eventually do RoboCops 2 and 3 on the program, just to see how well they have or haven't aged.
2 is still pretty good. It's not the same as RoboCop.
No.
It's just I was thinking about this earlier today. Well, what got me on was Last of Us, because there is a sequel to Last of Us, which was unnecessary. And then I was thinking about RoboCop, and I was thinking about other movies that the initial game or movie, whatever it was so complete. You love the characters, you love the settings, it's just perfect. It's just leave it. It is a complete picture on its own. But then inevitably they got to make a sequel, and I always feel that no matter how good the sequel is, it's just never going to be on the same level. You just can't do it. I can't think of an example.
No, it's the sequel curse is a kind of a known thing, and you're talking about an era of Hollywood where it's like, unless they're like, say, there's very few movies that were planned with a sequel in mind. I keep thinking maybe like Back to the Future was one that had a sequel.
That's probably why those movies don't lend themselves to sequels. Whereas nowadays, I think we have the opposite problem, where the franchise is the big thing. So every movie is a franchise starter. It's not a complete film. It's people might like all these other characters. We could do spin-offs. We have the opposite problem now.
Yeah, may I throw out from this time period an example of one film series that bucked that trend in Terminator 2?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
But I think Terminator 2 stands out simply because it did buck the trend, and also there was quite a sizable gap. I think it was about 8 years between the first Terminator film and the second film.
Yes.
And that's basically meant that they're revisiting it not because it's a quick cash grab, because the zeitgeist moment of the popularity of the Terminator is gone. So for them to come back to it for that sequel, it was because obviously James Cameron and the creative team had a very clear idea of what they wanted to do and make it really impressive, and for them it worked.
Yeah, I'll say James Cameron is actually good at sequels, because Aliens is obviously as good as Alien. Very different. But...
And another one that he took time. It was about 7 years, I think, between the first Alien film and the sequel. So I think it's more a case of, if you give yourself the time, or you're permitted the time to really think, okay, what is the point of making this new story with these same characters? I think that's where it works. Whereas perhaps with something like RoboCop 2, it was a little bit more, we have to do this now because people won't want a RoboCop film in 10 years' time.
Well, that's the big issue, is that all of a sudden, like, RoboCop became this progressively more kiddified, child-friendly franchise that kept aging it down, like PG-ifying the violence to the point where you get a live-action RoboCop series where the only time he pulls out a gun is to shoot a pile of crates onto the bad guys' heads and dumb shit like that. And the funny thing you mentioned about Terminator is actually that both Terminator 1 and 2 have sequel hooks. That was the thing. Like the original ending of Terminator 2 actually had a concrete, this is the end, the robots have been defeated, and had a flash forward to Sarah Connor in the future, and all the kids are growing up, and Judgment Day doesn't happen. Whereas they decided to make it ambiguous because also they kind of knew they wanted to do another one, and that sucked. But yeah, it's funny when, like, the creative team who takes the time to make a sequel and really put the time and energy and try and say something with it, always ends up with a better project than, we got to crap out something in 2 years. It's just, that's how movies get made. They have to have time to cook.
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So this is the minute we have all been waiting for. I should mention, we've buried the lead here, but you want some melty Toxic Avenger Man action? Because it's coming right up. It's Emil's last moments on Earth.
Yeah, well, he finally gets a butterflied next minute, but yeah, this is what when I first told you about the podcast, Stephen, this was the minute you requested, so I've always kept that in the back of my mind. It was like,
Thank you. I'm
two
very
years ago?
appreciative.
Yeah. So it was like, yeah, it's coming up, and we had like an 8-month hiatus, and it's like, yep, we're doing it to get you on. So okay, so why did you choose the Melty Man scene, or is it just because it's just one of those scenes?
For me, when you first told me that you were doing a 60-second per episode review of RoboCop, it was the first scene that came to mind as going, I'd be really curious to hear an episode about that. So to actually be on it is very exciting as well, because it is, with the possible exception of, and I'm not great with the names in RoboCop lore, but of the big robot that says you have so many seconds to comply.
209.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. With the exception of that massacring the people in the boardroom, the toxic waste, and then the guy getting hit and just disintegrated by the car was the thing that really stuck out to me my first time watching it as like an 11, 12-year-old, is going, oh my God, that's so gross and cool.
That scared the shit out of me as a child. I was probably not much older, probably 14. Oh no. No.
Yeah, I just put down an iconic moment in a movie full of iconic moments. Like, yeah, this is just one of those things. It's just like, oh, well, literally, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before, and I can't even think of anything since that's probably not outside of like a B-grade schlock film. Like, Hollywood doesn't do this type of thing. Like,
it came out of nowhere. I think that's why it's so shocking, is there was no body horror of that description. You know, technically the whole thing is body horror because it's cybernetics and all of that, but that's all clean and sanitized, whereas this is just, visceral, up in your face, out of nowhere.
Well, even like, you know, it's like Emil's flesh being so gross and distended is horrific enough, and then his ultimate fate is just like, Jesus.
The effects are so well done because the attention to detail of, the skin is still sort of holding together. It's not burns. It's not peeling off. It's just it lost all its elasticity and it's sagging, and then it's fallen off the fingers as if it's slow cooked meat, and it's degloved, as they call it.
And it's the slow reveal for me, because I've got this minute on loop as we're talking, and it's that you don't see Emil face on to begin with. You see the back of his head, and you can see that he's suffering from the most sudden male pattern baldness that's ever happened. And then you can see that his hands aren't quite the shape that they were previously. And then the next shot that they cut to, it's him front on, but not fully front on. He's on a little bit of an angle, and you can see that the skin on his fingers is starting to droop off, and it's swollen, and his mouth is drooping down to one side, and he just looks like he is incredibly uncomfortable. Not in pain, which I think is interesting, but just looks so confused, uncomfortable, and like the fact that toxic waste has done that to him in such a short period of time as well is I think where the fear comes from. And again, we watched this when we were younger. I think we all thought that quicksand was going to be a bigger part of our lives and a problem, and I think toxic waste was one of those things where I was like, I better not fall in any toxic waste. I better keep an eye out for that.
Yeah, you got to remember, like, this is the how many years after 3 Mile Island, and like the fossil fuel industry had incredibly ramped up the paranoia of nuclear waste and nuclear energy, especially after the China syndrome came out.
Sorry, this just came into my mind. I have not thought about it in, 30 years. The Secret World of Alex Mack. Does anyone remember that show?
I know that was a show, but I can't say I've ever seen it.
I haven't seen it either.
So she gets toxic waste dumped on her, and then she can turn into a quicksilver blob that crawls along the ground. And
you recall that.
Alexandra Mack develops powerful abilities after a chemical factory accident. She struggles to balance her ordinary life with extraordinary misadventures as a result.
Well, here's the other fun toxic waste superpower fact. the toxic chemicals that blinded Matt Murdock and turned him into Daredevil are the same toxic chemicals that mutated the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
That is true.
I did not know that.
Yeah, in the comics, because basically the TMNT, the original comic books, were basically fanfic for Frank Miller's Daredevil. That's why the foot instead of the hand, things like that. So yeah,
And that's why Matt Murdock wears tortoiseshell glasses, I presume. Yeah,
exactly. It's harking back.
it's all connected.
It's all good. No, that's the other show that we occasionally guest on.
Oh right, yes, right.
Shout out to Batman. But no, the funny thing is, in that moment before the reveal, actually, no, just quickly about that reveal. I like how Emil, oh god, I can't think of the actor's name, but yeah, he doesn't quite know what's happening, and then he looks at his hands, and that's when he just starts making that noise, and it's like
Great
guttural
screaming.
Yeah, Paul McCrane plays Emil. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, I don't have IMDb up at the moment. I kind of get the ghost kind of checking all the IMDb names because we kind of gone through them all. But there's a shot just before the scene you're talking about where it's Emil like flops out of the toxic waste and there's a smoke wall around. Apparently, Verhoeven was worried that there was too much smoke in the shot. You couldn't see what was going on, and in the commentary, Ed actually remarks that it actually works quite well because you see that something is moving around in that muck, but you can't quite see what it is. So when you do get the reveal, it is a bit more of a punch as opposed to just seeing this like melting man coming out of this sludge, which is probably what you get more now, or the next Marvel superhero,
or you would see the transformation process. You would see that the fingers start to like come away from the bone and warp and do all of that.
I kind of feel that modern movies... I know we bag on modern movies a lot, but I kind of feel that there's less happy coincidences, happy accidents, you know?
Yeah.
Because it's just so much more structured. It feels like there's less of a gamble with a lot of these movies, or at least from what I've seen.
Oh, there's also that thing where you got the... essentially now the response to the people like CinemaSins, so people get really overly bent out of shape about having to explain everything in a movie when it's fantastical. Less so in fantasy, but like especially like modern day sci-fi and stuff like that. They have like, you know, did we really need an Iron Man scene? Okay, it is cool. Do we really need a scene in Iron Man where he's building the costume and trying to explain what he's doing? But it worked for that. But like there's other movies where they're just like the let's go to our regular punching bag, not quite yet, but like the remake of RoboCop where they have to try and explain everything about RoboCop. And it's like, well, they didn't do that in the original because it wasn't necessary.
I'm realizing that a lot of modern media has turned into Metal Gear, because Metal Gear, in the middle of, you know, war, you'll have a character calling you on the codec going, Snake, did you know that bioluminescence works because of this very complex chemical procedure? I'm being fired at. What the fuck are you talking about?
I think it all depends on the context, though, when it comes to the storytelling. And I think, for example, with the media audience that is as literate as it is today in certain texts, your Batman film doesn't need to explain how Batman became, you know, how Bruce Wayne became Batman. We don't need to see
how Batman begins,
we don't need,
if you will.
Yeah, we don't need to see parents in an alleyway, pearls being clutched, a funeral, sad young boy, suddenly sad young man. Like, we don't actually necessarily need that. It's the same way how the Tom Holland Spider-Man films didn't have the Uncle Ben scene. What they did, which I thought was quite clever, was they actually saved the Uncle Ben scene for the third film.
Yes.
And I certainly had the experience of when that happened, going, oh, I didn't realise we hadn't had this. I thought we'd just skipped over it. It was essentially we had a 3-film origin story for this character, which was a very interesting way of doing it. But for a lot of these properties, and particularly for something like RoboCop, which hadn't had a a film or any sort of connected big media in a generation, I think it does make sense that they explain this is how this person becomes the RoboCop. But I do think that its effectiveness is dependent on a number of factors, including things that are in their control, like how well it's scripted, how well it's shot, but also things that are out of their control. You know, if you're doing this RoboCop film, it was 2014 was the remake, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so we've had 5 or 6 years for most of the audience that are going to the cinema at that time of superhero origin stories with the Marvel Universe. And that's essentially what you have with RoboCop, is a kind of superhero origin story. And if it's not doing something that's quite new within that genre, you can sit there going, oh, why are we seeing this? Just get to the bit where he's a robot cop. I just want to see him be a robot cop. You know, that kind of thing.
That wasn't my gripe to this. Yeah, I get the origin stories and stuff. No, the problem with RoboCop is that it ends up being like an hour's worth of just useless filler when it's just this whole ongoing thing about him and his family, and it doesn't really tie together. Just, again, a lot of it was kidification. Like, it's just like... It needed to... The pacing in the remake is just god-awful. It just really is. We're literally at the point of the movie where they tried to cram in the final act and a half of the original movie in 8 minutes. And it's bad.
Yeah,
and it's a mess.
I mean, that comes down then to the fact that it's not necessarily been put together well by the creative team, whether that is a scripting issue or whether that is an editing issue, or whether, and perhaps this is something that's really hard to tell, if it's a budget issue.
No, a lot of it was producers, from what we've been able to gather. Like, the director had an idea.
Like there was a genuine idea. There was a genuine intention to do something interesting, and it got trampled on.
Yeah. So that's the problem. It's just like, it felt like this was the remake was a movie that got destroyed by committee. So too many notes. That's okay. Oh, this is an interesting note I got here. So at the beginning of this scene, there's a quick car chase. We can probably talk about that later because it's really not that important.
Sweet car stunts.
Murphy shoots at Emil to distract him, which I love this bit. Thing about the his gun is, like, when it shoots, you can hear like a 3-round burst in the Foley, in the sound effect. But if you look at the windscreen, there's 9 bullet marks. So does each bullet fragment 3 times?
Or it shoots 3 bullets at once. And what I've noticed, because I've got it frozen on my screen in front of me, is it appears in like a heart shape almost. It's like drawn a little love
like
heart
a shotgun where it breaks apart. Is that how this works?
Well, shotguns don't break apart. They literally have pellets. It's like,
and also they tend to be a bit more evenly scattered than this. Whereas this, it's almost like he's tried to like shoot a love heart into the window. You know, almost like he's going, you know, I love you. I'm sorry for what is about to happen.
Well, that might... I love this little moment as well when Murphy does that little hop and jumps out of the way.
Yeah, he's not a very mobile character.
No.
but which, you know, could potentially be an issue for somebody in law enforcement who's apparently frequently in the firing line and, you know, shooting people in front of toxic waste. Because I'm sure if he'd got covered in that toxic waste, his mechanics would not be in a good way.
No, probably not. Well, not at the moment where it's all kind of dinged up and shot to pieces, but he's fine. He gets out of the way. But
yeah, the very gentle hop.
It's just a lovely moment, in a movie full of just lovely moments like this, and I just had to remark upon it. I do have some commentary and book notes for running out of things to talk about, but
so I was just gonna, because I have to talk about the cars, obviously, but I was curious to see, because they've built it on top of the SUX. They've built that on top of the body of a I can't remember, but an existing car, and I think it's just the front they've had to modify. And so in a scene like this where it's being whipped around, you're seeing it jumping around a bit. There's not any wobbling, so that is very well made. Because, man, Knight Rider,
You look like crap.
especially season 1 of Knight Rider. The front of that car, the kit, is just the flaps are coming off. It changes from one scene to the next. So for a car that's not in this movie that much, they did a good job with it. I'll give them points for that. The SUX doesn't suck.
What about the van that crashes into the toxic waste disposal? Have you got any thoughts on how that has been constructed?
We have talked about the van before. No modifications on that except for just stripping back the paint and making it look all weathered and grungy and lovely.
It does look like it was riveted together as opposed to constructed.
I love that.
I do.
What I quite like is how the doors just gently open to let all the toxic waste out. I think that's quite a nice feature, that if your car does fill with toxic waste while you're driving, it has a vent system, which is very nice.
Yeah. Well, just imagine if you drive that into a pool as well. At least it helps you get out, or even into a lake or a river.
I mean, it's lucky it did, because if it didn't, poor Emil would have been stuck in there. He would have drowned and melted at the same time.
I guess one would solve the other.
Yeah, so it's maybe, I know what happens to him next isn't good, but maybe that was actually for the best, as opposed to going through the experience of becoming the soup that you were drowning in.
It's deep. It's metaphorical.
Toxic Soup. Toxic Soup is my alt punk band. No, funny about the talking about the car. So in the commentary, apparently Paul Verhoeven wasn't really all that comfortable with doing car chases. I don't think he had ever done them or that before. They don't really talk about it that much. Maybe it's in when we get more car chase scene later on. But Ed also says that he got more comfortable doing them at least by the time of Basic Instinct. I honestly can't remember a car chase in Basic Instinct, but let's face it, people only essentially remember one scene from Basic Instinct. That's because they had it on repeat.
Yeah, not famous so much for its car stunts as for an unfortunate spoonerism of that term.
Yes. Yes, I was going to say something similar, but yes.
Basic Instinct and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I think those are the two VHSs
That got worn out.
that were just worn out, but in one spot.
Under Siege.
Oh, yes. I forgot about Under Siege.
Some people... Well, that's it. Yeah. There's a few famous scenes, and that's one of them. That's just like, oh, Under Siege. Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I don't... Which... Is this the Steven Seagal movie I'm thinking of?
Yeah, it's the scene where Erika Eleniak jumps out of the cake topless. Well, stripping to topless.
There you go.
Because she was a former Baywatch star, and so, of course, it was she went on to have a lucrative film career, in which I say she basically did Under Siege and not much else.
Yeah, her character in that, I believe, that was it like the chef's birthday or something like that? It was something like that.
Well, I see Steven Seagal in a chef's hat, so I assume so.
Yeah.
I think it was the captain's birthday or the ship's birthday. And...
Yeah. Actually, that would make more sense, because I don't know if anyone else on a military vessel would get away with, or would have, I suppose, the clout to get away with hiding someone on a cake. And coming on board a military vessel.
It was the pretense that the terrorists used to get on board, is bringing her on board, and her entourage, and then they hijack the ship. So
okay.
Yeah.
Again, it's been a very long time since I watched Under Siege, and I know it's not quite the point of this program. But
we tangent like crazy. Don't worry.
Okay, well, was her character in on the plot, or did she just think this was another cake gig?
She was just a Playboy bunny hide for the gig.
Right, okay. So she wasn't part of this terrorist group. She had no idea.
No. She's the quasi-love interest. But
see, I feel like, not to try and help out terrorists, but surely you would have a member of your group in the cake.
Comes out guns blazing.
Yeah.
I was just watching Hot Shots Part 2 before we started recording this. And it's weird that everything we're talking about is referenced in that movie. Because there's the leg crossing scene. There is cake.
Yeah.
There is a few other things we met, and I don't know why.
Oh,
But I mean, it
I
does
love the Hot
encapsulate
Shots
everything
films.
of the 80s and 90s action films. So
Yeah, I wish they, even though unfortunately, like, it still requires pretty much getting Charlie Sheen out of retirement. I wish they would do Hot Shots 3 for no other reason, just to make sure they have one up on Top Gun.
and so they can make fun of all these reboot makefuls where they drag the corpses of these actors out of retirement for one last. It's not one last one, but
No,
they
no,
act like it's
okay.
one last one.
I rescind that because they might have to drag the corpse of Lloyd Bridges out, and no, thank you.
No, we don't need to see that.
Yeah, I love Lloyd Bridges, don't get me wrong, but that's probably going a bit too far.
Yeah, look, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it.
Yeah, and we'll subsequently burn it down.
Just use AI, we'll just deepfake it, it's fine.
Oh God, no, they get not Jeff Bridges, his brother, Bo Bridges.
Yeah.
That's it.
He wouldn't be bad at it, actually, yeah.
Yeah, getting Bo Bridges in to be Lloyd Bridges. I don't think I've ever seen him do comedy, so no idea.
Yeah, I don't know if you can fund a comedy film based on the star cast of a retired Charlie Sheen and Bo Bridges. I don't know if that's quite going to get people excited, I'm afraid.
Well, you could get him back with his former Two and a Half Men co-host, who was also in Hot Shots as
That
Wash.
Ducky, I don't remember the accent, but yeah, I was surprised. Oh, they knew each other before Two and a Half Men.
Yeah, that's why I actually was surprised when I saw two. Okay, we're getting way off topic, but
Yeah, maybe it's Hot Shots : Two and a Half Men. Maybe Two and a Half Men is the sequel that we didn't realise. It's all the Hot Shots sequel.
Oh, that would be amazing. But it's also funny when you look at Hot Shots 2 now. You see it's like Ryan Stiles is there, and you're just like, oh, fucking hell, it's Ryan Stiles. What the hell's he doing in this? Anyway, the only comment on the commentary I've got left is Ed remarks that the makeup is by Rob Bottin, who was one of the co-designers of, I think it was co-designer of the Robocop costume as well. So, yeah, great makeup.
I mean, the thing with the makeup in this film, and we see a little bit of it in this clip, is I was always really impressed with the way that the face overlapped the mechanics and the mechanics overlapped the face. Because particularly the first time I watched this as a child, going, how did they stretch his skin over that? And obviously it's not his skin. It's
brilliant.
Yeah, it's an effect, but it looks, even now, just I've got it paused on the screen, and it looks seamless to this untrained eye when it comes to makeup. It's a really effective, simple visual technique of showing just how inhuman this character is in a physical sense, and the whole design of RoboCop is, even though it's so slow and ponderous, and maybe not the most well designed for the job that it entails, it looks great. It really does look fantastic.
The design of RoboCop in Ed 209 are really fantastic. Like, visually, practicality is one thing, but I don't think they were really thinking about that in the 80s. But like the silhouette of RoboCop is just, even without you can see what he is. Like, it's so iconic with the shoulders and the helmet, and like, it's such a great piece of visual. Like, you line up RoboCop with any other robot, droid, or whatever, and you get it. Like, you get that's a man in a suit without it's we've already harped on so much about that damn suit, and it's clunky and everything, but it's gorgeous. It really is.
I think robots and aliens are the two hardest things to design because there's both too much freedom and not enough freedom in terms of what you can do, especially when you're dealing with a physical actor inside of it. So the fact that RoboCop, even all these years later, is still iconic. There's nothing else that looks like that. That is so RoboCop and nothing else. It's brilliant.
Oh, so you say about the limitations and freedom. One of my favorite stories of I'm just trying to think of his name. It's something Jeffries, the guy who designed the USS Enterprise for TOS.
Well, shit. That's exactly what I was hoping to spare you from.
got to get a Star Trek reference in there. How he came about with that, I want to say Peter Jeffries, but it's the Jeffries tubes are named after him. He actually
Matt Jeffries.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
He actually found every single image he could find of like a spaceship from like all from like the previous sci-fi movies, like books and all that stuff, and he just basically put them on a wall and looked at it and went, "That's what I'm not doing."
I love it.
And it's because a lot of it was just like what we normally think of like missiles and stuff like that, tubes with fins and that kind of gear, and he was just like, "That's not what I'm doing." And he then came up with the first design of the Enterprise, which was a sphere instead of a saucer, and then the second revision that got changed to the saucer, and it's still an object that is so fundamentally this thing that it resonates 60 plus years later, and that's great design.
Sorry, I just had a moment of realizing there will be a point where Star Trek reaches 100 years old, and well, I hope I'm alive for that. But that's a weird thought. That is bizarre.
Yeah. Well, sorry, it's currently 57 years old. It was 66, so yeah, nearly 60 years old. No, it's Doctor Who is 60 years old.
It's Doctor Who minus 3 is how I remember it.
Yeah, me too, actually.
Yeah. So 66 was the first appearance of both Star Trek and indeed the Enterprise, and I think that's a really key part as well, because obviously, just to use my background as a academic in science fiction, just for a moment.
Yeah, sure.
One of the really sort of key fundamental things of science fiction which lasts is it plays around with an idea at a time where that idea is starting to emerge and become significant to the society that it comes out of. So, for example, something like the USS Enterprise is a great example, because obviously Star Trek is first released in 66, so it's being made in the middle of the 60s, when the country that it was made in, the United States, is part of the space race. And the idea that Roddenberry had of this being one, the era of like science fiction being popular in media and sort of replacing the Western in a lot of respects. But what it also did was it combined that with the look at the social change and the social situation in the United States at that time, where there was a lot of civil unrest, and so Star Trek really reflected that. And I think again it did something that no other science fiction show was doing. Roddenberry essentially did what Jeffries did, which was put everything up on the wall and go, what isn't being done currently. When you look at something like RoboCop, I think RoboCop is very reactive to what the United States was like in certainly the 1980s and a bit in the late 1970s. The first RoboCop is released while Reagan is still president, and I think we're still really picking apart the ideological and social impacts that Reaganism had on the United States and the Western world. And the fact that the future America that is shown in RoboCop, and specifically it's Detroit, I think it's really interesting that so much of RoboCop's identity is tied to one city as opposed to America in general. And I think it's really interesting that you see something like RoboCop and the design is quite unique, but it's also tied to this idea of law enforcement becoming less personalized. And we only have to look at what law enforcement issues exist today, both here in Australia, but more specifically in America and other places around the world, and about how ideology around policing has changed and how communities react to it. And the fact is that in some places around the world, policing has become much more militaristic and more along the lines of the RoboCop model, which I guess was something that was always present and always something that could have happened. It's not necessarily that these police officers are pulling giant guns out of their legs. That's where the fantasy comes in. That's where the imagination gets to flourish. But the idea that underpins it is an idea that remains relevant today, even though this film is getting close to 40 years old now.
Well, it's interesting because like you look at the modern day cop uniform, like it's like in America, it's almost standard now for them to be wearing some sort of flak vest or, protective gear. Like, yeah, the insane militarization of law enforcement in certain parts of America is like some of these police departments have bloody military vehicles. Have almost got to the point where they're getting tanks. Like, it's absurd. But yeah, it's Robocop is definitely a reflection on corporate America, the Reaganism. Although I'm just trying to say, I think was this made during the first term or second term of
second
Reagan?
term it would have been.
Yeah, and yeah, we're still dealing with Reaganomics and trickle down economics, and people still insist that it works, even though the pay gap has radically increased between the middle class and the upper class, and especially the lower class. It's absurd, and that's why we need a Robocop to free us from these corporate pigs who have just taken a free service away from us, bastards.
Did we want to talk about gaslighting, Robocop? Speaking of corporate bastards.
I just have one quick note. In the book and the script, apparently it's Lewis that actually drives Emil into the toxic waste and not Murphy, which I like that change. There's not really much to say about the book and the script because it's mostly just action stuff, so yeah, not really much.
Yeah, so, now I'm thinking about the placement of those characters, where they end up in the script. I mean, I'm used to where it is, but
yeah.
Well, no, because I think Lewis ends up in the water first, and then Robocop shows up and does his Robo Jesus. So no, yeah, it has to be the way it is.
Well, Lewis is chasing Boddicker at the moment.
Yeah.
So, which makes more sense, have the cop in the car chasing the crim in the car, as opposed to the cop in the car slamming the... Yeah, either way.
Do you reckon that toxic waste is radioactive?
It's at least toxic.
It's definitely. It says right on the tin, toxic. So we know that.
I've always assumed it was radioactive, but I think that's just because the media kind of, at least back in that time, they were just synonymous.
Yeah. Well, I'll get into. There are things that make me think it might be in the next minute, but we'll leave that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it basically comes down to whether or not toxic waste comes from a radioactive source, because not all toxic waste comes from radiation.
No.
That would probably be what it is. I'm guessing, based on what happened in this film, that was radioactive toxic waste, in which case I think there's some serious questions about how toxic waste is stored in Detroit, because it should be much more secure, certainly more secure than having a van accidentally driving into it than it is, because that is very bad OH&S.
To be fair, there's no OH&S issues here because it is an abandoned mill, so yeah, probably someone should have cleaned it up.
But Chernobyl's abandoned. You can't just drive a truck up to it, though. There are measures in place. There should be measures in place here, even in crime-riddled Detroit. They should be close to inaccessible.
Oh, there's a great, as in horrific, episode of Well, There's Your Problem where I can't remember which country it is. It's one of these poor countries in South America where these bunch of scrappers find an abandoned X-ray machine, but because they're all illiterate, they don't know what the warnings are, and there's no labeling like danger, toxic, radioactive things. So they pull it apart, and they find this glowing blue powder, and they're like, oh, what's this? I don't know, let's sprinkle it on some toast. Yeah.
I mean, there are so many stories of people finding this. It's a warm little metal thing. Oh, well, we're cold. We're out in the snow. Let's keep it nearby. No.
Oh, well, look at, what's her face? The first radioactive paint material. What's it called?
The radium.
No, radium.
The radium.
Yeah,
gas.
but like people didn't know it was deadly, so they would make all these watches and
paint their teeth with it.
Yeah, and the first watchmakers who were using that to paint the tips, they were, and I still do this occasionally, because they're using such fine brushes, you usually tend to point them with your mouth. You wash them out. You use your mouth to give them a point. Then you dip the thing, because they've still got traces of fucking irradiated paint on there, so they were getting deaded as well. So yeah, there's just we love playing around with radioactivity until we realise it's kind of bad.
But it's quite pertinent as well, because the incident you're referring to in South America was the Goiana incident.
That's it.
Yeah, so that was something funnily enough, I did some research on as part of my PhD. The Goiana incident actually happened in 1987, the same year that RoboCop came out. Yeah, so it is something where, you know, nuclear waste and how nuclear waste was disposed, or in this case, it was an unsecured radiotherapy piece of machinery. But the fact is the way that nuclear waste had to be stored and kept away from the public was part of it, because I mean this incident killed 4 people but contaminated a favela of about 250 odd people were affected by this, and it was one of those instances where this happened for the first time in a really widespread way, and it is why we have those practices today, and that's why you can't just drive a truck into it, Emil.
Well, the wife of one of the scrappers was carrying it around in a plastic bag.
Yeah, as you say, they didn't know. They didn't
no,
know.
That's it. I'm not blaming them. It's just like, holy crap! It was actually that incident that...
I don't remember what happened, but it was in Mexico, I believe, and it was a whole family, and the grandparents too, I believe. The grandmother, at least, was living with them. The son finds this little metal thing in the front yard, brings it inside, and he's carrying it around the house. He's playing with it all the time. One by one, everyone in the family gets sick. Everyone dies. The only one who survives is the father, the husband, and that's when they discover, oh, this is radiation. So they investigate the house and they finally discover this little thing. Jesus Christ, that late that he's lost everyone.
Yeah, it was that incident that we're talking about. It's actually what finally led the nuclear powers to basically put in regulations to track and trace all radioactive material.
But it makes sense that then our media is reflecting that. The fact is that a film in the same year, it came out before this incident, but a film in the same year with RoboCop, having this incident where, even though it's set up a little bit like a Looney Tunes cartoon, that there's this toxic waste that is there that is like a threat. We don't see toxic waste in a lot of our modern media as being a potential threat. We don't see it because it's not really on our minds as being a threat. That right now, I think you'll see a lot more stuff about communicable airborne diseases. I think there's a reason why The Last of Us did so well as a TV show in a post-COVID-19 pandemic world, because we have more of a shared trauma and understanding of what these sorts of things can do to communities and to society. It reflects...
Yeah, that really hit differently. There were a lot of things... I mean, it didn't play out, obviously, like it does in real life. But yeah, in that first episode, it's just, this is relatable.
And particularly comparing it to when if you played the game before the pandemic, like when you come to that scene, you're like, yeah, I'm a bit more afraid of this now because we know why we should be afraid of these things because we have skin in the game, we have context, and again,
so we don't have Cold War. The Cold War was all about nuclear Armageddon. We're all going to be wiped out by that, and it's
mutually assured destruction.
Yeah, I watch a lot of 80s media, and there's a lot. They're just so fixated on that. There's not a talk about disease or anything like that. And then, in the past decade or so, you got Last of Us, Death Stranding, The Walking Dead, just endless things fixated on viral-based apocalypses.
Well, it's better than the Arabs terrorizing us by flying planes into it, which is pretty much post 9/11.
But an interesting consequence.
24 sure was a show, huh?
It definitely was. An interesting consequence of that, though, is when you got the more nuanced stuff, where it wasn't just going specifically, these people who are like these other people that did a real world bad thing, therefore must be bad. But you had a lot of text, particularly I'd say the 2010s, where you started to see the fear of the other, but not being able to identify who the other is.
Mm.
And part of that does feed into the zombie case, the zombie
Yeah.
media, because you don't know if somebody's infected or not until usually it's too late.
Yeah.
But also you look at things where, there are people who take on the identity of other people, or can shapeshift or transform, a bit like the guys from Marvel that are green. Is it the Skrull?
Changelings, but yeah,
Skrulls.
Skrulls.
Yeah, the Skrull. You've got the Zygons in Doctor Who, which made a pretty marked comeback in the early 2010s. It is somewhat reflective of that concept without it being tied to the real world issue that was what happened post 9/11.
Yeah, cool. So one thing I just quickly bring up, because you're talking about toxic waste and all that, and Courtney did bring it up very early on about Toxic Crusader. The Toxic Avenger was 1984, so predates this one, and realistically speaking, probably the closest we get to Emil's think of actually like a guy who gets covered in toxic waste and is
I wonder if they were looking at that for inspiration.
probably, but instead of him like becoming a melting man, it just turns into like a gigantic muscle melted guy. And
Yes.
that became a franchise, and like RoboCop, turned into a kiddie cartoon with kiddie toys. So it's like this like R-rated exploitation, B-grade like cult classic gets turned into a kiddification.
But I mean, I had a RoboCop action figure and I loved it.
Yeah.
So it's in my case, I'd say it's justified.
I wanted a RoboCop action figure so badly. I wanted a RoboCop costume when I was a kid.
I've got one now, so I'm living the dream.
Yeah, I know. I had a bootleg and it was kind of crap.
Gaslighting?
Yeah, if we delayed it long enough.
Alex, how do you feel? I feel fine, Dr. Norton.
Minute 103 begins with Rorschach about to put RoboCop out of his misery, and hopefully us too, and ends with the helicopter flying away from RoboCop.
Yeah, my thing is, Stephen, I only have one note because I refuse to do any more work on these goddamn movies. The only thing I wrote down was Lewis did another thing and is immediately downed.
Yes, that's what I had to say. He comes to the rescue, and then he gets immediately shot too. He's fucking useless.
So this is the remake, correct?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
full disclosure, I have now seen 1 minute of the remake, which is the
That's
minute
1 minute too much.
that you sent me.
Yeah.
And I must say, it didn't particularly grab me.
Don't
Like,
worry, you're
yeah.
not missing much.
I'm guessing that. I mean, my experience watching it was, oh no, RoboCop's down, and that's an interesting suit design. I don't hate it, but it is pretty busted up, and I haven't seen what it's meant to
It
do.
actually looks good here, better
Okay.
than it normally does, because I think when you've got the missing arm, you've got the visor all destroyed, it looks more convincing as a robot. It looks really cool. Otherwise, he just looks like gay Batman. I don't know. And by gay Batman, I mean...
That DSM.
Oh god, hang on, no, that's a very... I'm sorry, I'm going to make reference to a very obscure anime. Never mind, just don't worry about it. But he does look kind of like gay Batman. So.
And the other thing I learned was that Michael Keaton is in this film. So I'm like,
Yes.
oh, okay, he's all right. Having a Batman in there, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, Michael Keaton's one of the best things in this movie because it's Michael Keaton.
But yeah, the clip, I was like, oh, there's no toxic waste in this whatsoever, so it's automatically not as good as the 87 version for me.
Boy, here's the funny thing. The scene that we're watching here is essentially the scene that happens in the original movie half an hour ago, where RoboCop finally confronts Dick Jones, and Dick Jones executes Directive 4. This is this scene less than 10 minutes before the end.
I see what you mean about the pacing then, because yes, that's a little bit late.
Yeah, we're literally trying to catch up with like 30 odd minutes worth of plot in. It's just not good. And yeah, this is like second or third or fourth appearance of Lewis in this film. Like Lewis is such a non-character that it's like, we were legitimately going, is Lewis even in this movie throughout the rest of it? We cannot remember.
I will say, Joel Kinnaman, looking at him in just that minute, I'm like, actually, he's got the right look for a RoboCop, lead. Yeah, I was looking at him going like, actually, yeah, I could see this, because I did watch one episode of Altered Carbon when that first came out, and it wasn't really
not bad in it.
That show wasn't really my style or my speed, but I didn't dislike his performance, and seeing him in this 60-second clip of the film, I'm like, you know what? That's actually not the worst casting that they could have done in 2014. So I'm a little curious to see how they messed this up, but not curious enough to actually go and watch it, I'm afraid.
No, I'm trying to think. I think it was Niall that said, like, he's basically the equivalent of a piece of toast. Like, he is
Toast
just
is
white
nice.
bread in this
toast.
movie.
Yeah, toast can be fine, but
Yeah,
I
but,
suppose an hour and a half of toast, maybe not so much.
Like, well, I guess he's toast after the car bomb. Oh, that's the other thing. He doesn't get murdered like Murphy does. He gets car bombed, and he's still technically alive, and he's still technically Murphy throughout it all. So they don't even wipe it. It's bad. It's
Okay.
really bad.
Okay.
I hate myself for coming up with the pun "altered car bombed" in my head.
No. I think I'm gonna make. I think I'm gonna make Bat DSM the title for this episode. Oh god, that's gonna scratch some heads. I think we're all done and getting close to an hour, and I'm sure Steve has got more important things to do. But
I should probably get going.
any final thoughts on RoboCop, or shall we just want to get straight to the plug-in?
Oh, I'll just say that I've really enjoyed watching this minute of RoboCop on loop, as we've been discussing, because it is making me want to go, I kind of want to see more of this. And I did find a clip that did satisfy my needs for what's coming up in the next episode, where we get a fine mist of Emil created by Kurtwood Smith. So I'm looking forward to hearing how that one goes next time out. But yeah, RoboCop, a fun film.
And
It's perfect in every way.
as someone who studies sci-fi and as an academic and a scholar, I'm sure you can appreciate the deep philosophical and messaging while you're going, yeah, you blow him up.
Well, yeah, I mean that's just it. I think the reason RoboCop, the first film, is iconic is because it struck a chord with people at the time. It really worked in sort of combining, the critique of what society was like at the time and where it was being projected by the people that made the film, and at the same time being entertaining, being fun. Hyperviolence in the 1980s was really interesting because there was a real I shouldn't say that there was a real craft to it, because there is still a real craft to how it's done. It's just done differently. But RoboCop, I think, is a really great example of using filmmaking techniques to make something fantastical and honestly horrific. The idea of somebody melting and being exploded when a car hits them, or people being shot to death in the manner that a lot of people are, is not. If that was in the real world, you'd be horrified and traumatized for the rest of your life if you survived the experience. But as a piece of entertainment, it's something that we are able to enjoy because we are able to go. We can appreciate the craft that has been put into creating this, particularly with mostly practical effects, as in this film.
So would you like to plug anything? We talked about the podcast, so plug away, Patreon and all that stuff for you?
Yeah, so if you like the sound of this voice talking about the entire minutes of a film, as opposed to just one, we do a weekly program called the Cinema Catch-Up Club. It's been running since 2017. Every week, as was said earlier, we watch a film with two guests. Sometimes those guests are Simon. So far, those guests have never been Courtney, but who knows? It might be in the future. But it's always somebody who has seen the film and somebody who has not. We get together, and before we watch the film, we talk for about 5-10 minutes to the person who hasn't seen it, going, okay, what are you expecting from, in this case, let's say RoboCop? You know, what do you know about RoboCop? And whether or not they've heard about it or they know absolutely nothing about it, it's all completely fine. We get someone who's seen it before, and we go, okay, without spoiling it, what's this film about? What can we expect? And then we pause the recording, we watch the film, and as soon as the film is done, we start recording again and we review it in the immediate aftermath, which for some films is incredibly tricky. At the start of the year, we did known schlock movie, Cannibal Holocaust. Let me tell you, that was a tricky one to do immediately after watching it, because there was. Yeah, that one was pretty rough. But yes, we review the film, and we usually have quite a lot of fun doing it. That is available on all good podcasting services, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, whatever it is that you're using, we can be found there. And we do have a Patreon, as Simon said. You can become an official member of the club for as little as $1 a month. Just go to patreon.com/CCUC podcast. That's CCUC podcast, or search for the Cinema Catch-Up Club in Patreon, and there are bonus goodies and features, bonus episodes, that sort of thing. And if you're just after general news and updates, we do have a Facebook page. You can search for the Cinema Catch-Up Club there, and we post when new episodes go up every week in case you're not subscribed, and that's a great way to get in there and meet the community.
Yeah, and you can monthly vote on an episode, or you could do what I do and just choose one movie for 5 years.
Yes. We did get it. We did get it this year, though. Simon, who is one of our wonderful patrons, for every year we do an Australian Film Month, and as part of that, we let the audience vote on which film we're going to watch, and the patrons actually get to nominate what films go on the list. And Simon has, for 5 years, been putting forward Hercules Returns, a classic Australian comedy, for Australian Film Month. And this year he got his wish. Everyone voted for it, and we watched it, and it was a really good time. I really enjoyed Hercules Returns.
Yeah, I got to think of a new fun one to do next.
I haven't thought about that movie in forever. It's great.
And I just had a look, because I've got my spreadsheet of scores open, just in case you're curious. Out of 10, apparently I gave RoboCop 7.5 out of 10. So
what?
Did pretty good.
Get off this podcast.
Oh, I can be pretty harsh, Courtney. That's the thing. Like,
apparently, Jesus.
Well, by comparison, I gave Hercules Returns 5.5 out of 10, and I just said that I enjoyed it. So
no, that one's fair.
Yeah, but yes, no. Admittedly, the other guests on RoboCop, let me just pull that back up. They were perhaps a little kinder to it. In fact, our guest who had seen it did give it the appropriate 10 out of 10 that it deserved. And our guest who hadn't seen it before actually gave it 8 out of 10. So RoboCop did quite well. I was the curmudgeon, apparently.
Yes.
For me, not enough toxic waste exploding scenes. That was my problem with it.
Fair enough, actually, yeah.
Just 1.5 hours of toxic waste. I guess that's pretty much a trauma film at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, thank you for joining. I'm sorry it took so long, but it's been a blast.
It absolutely has. And again, strap in everybody for next week. You're going to watch a guy explode, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh God, yeah, looking forward to it. And that leads me to say, where can we find you, Courtney?
You can find me at traviandesigns.com, Travian. That's where I put all my art and cosplay and what have you. And I am Courtney and Ivy on Instagram. Oh, and Courtney Colson on YouTube.
And I guess you can find me at Painting with Night on Instagram, Facebook. Not really much else. I do have a YouTube channel, but no one looks at that. But more importantly, yes, like the things Stephen said earlier, Spotify, Apple Podcast, iTunes, that's still Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, all the podcasting services, this still goes up on YouTube. By the time this goes up, we should have restarted. So yay, we're live-ish for now, hopefully. I guess do the like, share, subscribe bullshit, all that lovely thing that the algorithm likes, because the algorithm owns our souls. And, oh, you don't know about this one. We have an end ritual. So,
Oh, yes.
So all I have to say to Courtney is, until next time.
Paging Mr. Robocock. Paging Mr. Robocock.
I'm not sure if I can even explain it with context.
Look, you don't have to. I'm happy to just put that. I'll save that for my next fever dream and just write it
Pee-wee's
off.
Big Adventure. There's a clue. There's a clue.
I got the paging Mr. Herman. I got that
okay.
bit, but I'm still.
Oh, the rest of that. Oh no.
Yeah, it's that bit I got. It's the Robocock specifically that I'm sort of going.
Well.
I'm going to stop recording. We could explain it. Maybe.